He mocked his wife for having no lawyer, but his mother enters the courtroom and changes everything. Rebecca Mitchell felt her hands tremble as she organized the few papers she had managed to gather on her own. Beside her, an empty table contrasted with the team of 3 lawyers her husband had brought, all impeccably dressed and carrying leather briefcases that seemed to cost more than her house. "Just look at this, everyone." Bradley laughed loudly, adjusting the loud yellow suit he wore purposely to draw attention. "My dear wife has decided she can defend herself. 15 years married to me, and she still hasn't learned that without money, you win nothing in life." His lawyers chuckled discreetly, pretending to organize documents to mask the awkwardness of the situation. Rebecca swallowed hard and tried to maintain her composure, even as she felt everyone present in the courtroom looking at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. She knew she was at a disadvantage, but her stubbornness wouldn't allow her to accept financial help from the few friends she still had. "Your Honor," Bradley continued, addressing the judge with a smug smile, "as you can see, my wife didn't even have the good sense to hire proper legal representation. This only proves what I've been saying for years. She lacks the capacity to manage anything, let alone claim half of my assets." The judge, a middle-aged man with a tired air, adjusted his glasses and flipped through the case files before him. Rebecca could feel the weight of the awkward silence that had taken over the room. Some people in the gallery whispered among themselves, clearly commenting on her situation. "Mrs. Mitchell," said the judge, addressing her in a patient but formal tone, "are you aware that this is a complex asset division case? Are you certain you wish to proceed without legal assistance?" Before Rebecca could answer, Bradley clapped slowly in a theatrical gesture of false admiration. "Come on, darling, don't be proud. Everyone here knows you don't understand anything about the law. Remember when you signed those papers without even reading them? You've always been like that, impulsive and irresponsible." Rebecca felt her face burn with shame. She vaguely remembered signing some documents years ago, but Bradley always said they were routine papers from his office. Back then, she trusted him completely and never questioned his financial decisions. "I can defend myself," she murmured, more to herself than to the court. "Of course you can." Bradley laughed even louder, provoking some muffled giggles from the audience. "Just like you could perform heart surgery or fly a plane, right?" Attorney Gerald Barnes, Bradley's lead lawyer, stood up elegantly and adjusted his dark suit. "Your Honor, I would like to present to the court some documents that prove the petitioner's complete inability to manage financial matters. As you will see, all the couple's assets were acquired exclusively with my client's resources, who has been a successful businessman for over 20 years. Rebecca watched with growing despair as stacks of papers were distributed. Contracts, deeds, bank statements, everything seemed perfectly organized to prove she was entitled to nothing. How had Bradley gathered so many documents without her knowing? "Furthermore," Attorney Gerald continued, "we have here a prenuptial agreement signed by the petitioner herself, in which she expressly waives any rights to assets acquired during the marriage." Rebecca felt the world spin. A prenuptial agreement. She didn't remember signing anything before the wedding. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to process the information. "That's not true," she said, her voice choked. "I never signed that." Bradley rolled his eyes dramatically. "Here we go again with these stories. You've always had memory problems, Rebecca, especially when you were taking those depression medications. The doctor even said they could affect your ability to remember." The audience murmured among themselves, and Rebecca felt herself growing smaller in the cold courtroom chair. It was true she had gone through a difficult period a few years after the marriage, when she took medication for anxiety and depression, but she never imagined that could be used against her. Attorney Gerald opened a folder and took out an official document. Here is the medical report from that time, confirming that the respondent was using medication that could impair her judgment. The signing of the contract coincides exactly with this period. Rebecca looked at the paper presented to the judge, trying to read it from afar. The doctor's handwriting was illegible, but she could see her own signature at the bottom of the document. How could she not remember that? "Your Honor," Bradley stood up, adopting a more serious tone, "everyone knows my wife is a good person, but she has always been, how can I put it, Emotionally unstable. Anyone here can confirm that she spent years depending completely on me for everything. Some heads in the audience nodded in agreement, and Rebecca recognized some neighbors and acquaintances Bradley had called as witnesses. The humiliation was almost unbearable. The saddest part, he continued, feigning sadness, is that she truly believes she is entitled to the fruits of my labor. 15 years supporting this household, paying for her shopping, her medical treatments, and now she wants half of everything. Bradley's second lawyer, Attorney Charles Henderson, stood up and presented more documents. Your Honor, as you can see in these bank statements, all deposits and financial transactions were made exclusively by Mr. Bradley Mitchell. Mrs. Rebecca never worked nor contributed financially to the couple's assets. It was true, and Rebecca knew it. Bradley had always insisted she didn't need to work, that he earned enough for both of them. At the time, she felt loved and protected. Now she saw it had been a trap. Furthermore, added Attorney Charles, we have here the deeds to all properties, including the residence where the couple lived. All are registered in the name of Mr. Bradley Mitchell or his mother, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Rebecca looked confusedly at Bradley. Mrs. Dorothy? Her mother-in-law was involved in this too. She had always been polite, but never showed much affection for her daughter-in-law. Perhaps she was helping her son take everything from her. My mother is a very wise woman, explained Bradley, smiling. She always advised me to protect my assets. Some properties were transferred to her name for tax and security reasons. The judge flipped through the documents with a concentrated expression, making occasional notes. Rebecca tried to follow, but the legal language was too confusing for her to fully understand. Mrs. Mitchell, the judge said again, do you have anything to declare about these documents? Rebecca stood up trembling, feeling everyone looking at her. Her voice came out weak and unsure. I don't remember signing that contract, and about the properties, I always thought they were ours. Bradley never told me they were in his mother's name. Bradley laughed loudly again. Of course you don't remember. You were never interested in these things. You always left everything to me, remember? Bradley, you're the one who understands these things, that's what you always said. The cruel imitation he did of her voice drew more chuckles from the audience, and Rebecca felt tears streaming freely down her face. How had she been so naive all those years? Attorney Gerald took advantage of her moment of vulnerability. Your Honor, as you can see, the defendant doesn't even have basic knowledge of the assets she is trying to claim. This only confirms our argument that she never actively participated in managing the family estate. The third attorney, Attorney Harold Thompson, who had remained silent until then, stood up with a folder full of papers. I would also like to present to the court these recent medical reports, which prove that Mrs. Rebecca still uses psychiatric medication, which may compromise her judgment and capacity for discernment. Rebecca felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. How did they get her medical reports? Wasn't that an invasion of privacy? I take medication for anxiety, she said, trying to defend herself. That doesn't mean I'm crazy or incompetent. No one is saying you are crazy, replied Attorney Gerald with false kindness. Only that you have limitations that should be considered in this proceeding. Bradley shook his head with feigned concern. You see, to this day she hasn't even managed to hire an attorney. How can someone like that manage half of an estate valued in the millions? The word millions echoed in the courtroom, causing murmurs among those present. Rebecca was shocked. Millions. She knew Bradley earned well, but she never imagined it was that much money. Mr. Bradley, asked the judge, can you give us a more precise estimate of the estate in question? Attorney Gerald consulted his papers. According to our assessment, Your Honor, the total estate amounts to approximately $2,800,000, including real estate investments and corporate holdings. Rebecca felt dizzy. Almost $3 million, and she had been counting coins to buy groceries at the end of the month. How had Bradley hidden so much wealth from her? Obviously, continued Attorney Gerald, a sum of this magnitude requires technical knowledge and experience in financial management to be properly administered. Bradley nodded in agreement. Exactly. That's why I always kept Rebecca away from these matters. It was to protect her, actually. She would get nervous just hearing about large numbers. Once again, some people in the audience shook their heads in agreement, as if they knew the couple well. Rebecca realized Bradley had prepared everything carefully, including the witnesses. Furthermore, added Bradley, she never showed any interest in learning. How many times did I try to teach her about investments, and she would change the subject? It was a lie. Bradley had never tried to teach her anything. On the contrary, he always discouraged her when she asked questions about money, saying such things weren't for delicate women like her. Attorney Charles presented more documents. Here are the receipts proving that Mr. Bradley always covered all household expenses alone. Electricity, water, telephone, supermarket bills, everything paid exclusively by him. Because he never let me work, murmured Rebecca, but her voice was drowned out by the noise in the courtroom. What did you say? Asked the judge. Rebecca took a deep breath and repeated louder, He never let me work. He always said a wife of his didn't need to work. Bradley laughed and looked at his attorneys as if she had said something absurd. Never let you, Rebecca? You tried to work a few times and always gave up. Remember that clothing store? How long did it last? 3 months. Rebecca remembered the store. It was true she had given up, but not due to incompetence. Bradley criticized everything she did, said she was neglecting the house, that customers complained about her, until one day she simply didn't have the strength to continue. And that time you wanted to take a computer course, continued Bradley. It lasted 2 weeks. It was always like that. You'd start things with excitement and quit halfway. Attorney Harold showed a folder with more papers. We have here statements from several people confirming the pattern of unstable behavior by the respondent. Neighbors, local merchants all report episodes of anxiety and difficulty concentrating. Rebecca felt completely exposed and humiliated. How had Bradley managed to gather so many people to speak ill of her? And worse still, could what they were saying be true? At that moment, the back door of the courtroom opened slowly, causing a slight creak that caught everyone's attention. An elegant lady with graying hair and a light beige pantsuit entered the room, walking with firm, decisive steps. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, Rebecca's mother-in-law, observed the scene for a few seconds before walking directly to her daughter-in-law's table. Her upright posture and severe expression caused an immediate silence in the courtroom. Bradley blinked several times, clearly surprised by his mother's presence. "Mother, what are you doing here? You weren't supposed to come today." Mrs. Dorothy did not answer her son. Instead, she stopped beside Rebecca and gently placed her hand on her shoulder. "May I sit here, my daughter?" she asked softly. Rebecca looked at her confused, but nodded positively. Her mother-in-law had never called her my daughter before. Mrs. Dorothy sat elegantly beside Rebecca and opened a black leather briefcase she was carrying. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "Bradley," she finally said, staring at her son, "you didn't tell me the hearing was today." I didn't think it necessary to bother you with this, Mother. It's just bureaucratic matters." Attorney Gerald stood up nervously. "Mrs. Dorothy, good to see you. As you well know, your presence is not necessary. Everything is already being resolved as planned." The mother-in-law looked at him with disdain. "Planned by whom? Certainly not by me." Bradley laughed nervously. "Mother, you're confused. We've already talked about this. Rebecca will be fine. Don't worry." Mrs. Dorothy opened her briefcase and took out a sealed envelope. "Your Honor," she addressed the judge directly, "I request permission to speak. I have relevant information about this case." The judge seemed intrigued. "You are?" "Dorothy Mitchell, mother of the petitioner, and also the legal owner of some of the assets being disputed in this proceeding." Attorney Gerald tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, Mrs. Dorothy is an elderly lady and may be confused about—" "I am 73 years old," Mrs. Dorothy cut in dryly. "I am not senile nor confused, and I have some important things to say about my son." Bradley began to sweat visibly. "Mother, please don't do this. You don't understand the situation." "I understand the situation perfectly, Bradley. I have understood it for longer than you imagine." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. Mrs. Dorothy looked directly at Rebecca with a maternal expression she had never shown before. "My dear daughter-in-law, forgive me for taking so long to do what is right, but today that will change." She turned to the judge and opened the envelope she had brought. "Your Honor, this is the original document of the supposed prenuptial agreement my son presented. I would like it to be compared with the version being used in the proceeding." Attorney Gerald turned pale. "This is irregular, Your Honor. The lady cannot simply show up with documents without—" "Yes, I can," interrupted Mrs. Dorothy, "especially when these documents prove my son committed signature forgery." The entire courtroom echoed with murmurs of shock. Bradley stood up abruptly. "Mother, you don't know what you're saying. You're mixing things up." Mrs. Dorothy took a small magnifying glass from her purse and showed the two documents side by side. "I am retired from the National Bank, where I worked for 40 years verifying signatures. I know very well how to recognize a forgery when I see one." She pointed to specific details in the signatures. "Look here, the letter M in the name Rebecca. On the genuine document, which she signed to congratulate me on my birthday last year, the stroke is ascending. On the forged document, it is descending." Rebecca observed the signatures and could indeed see the difference her mother-in-law was pointing out. Her heart began to race with a mixture of hope and anger. "Furthermore," continued Mrs. Dorothy, "my son used a different pen. On the original document, Rebecca used a blue pen, as she always does. In the forgery, a black pen was used." The judge asked to examine the documents closely, using a larger magnifying glass he kept on his desk. "There are indeed significant differences between the signatures," he stated after a few minutes of analysis. Bradley was visibly nervous, sweating and fidgeting with his hands constantly. "Mother, this is a misunderstanding. Maybe Rebecca's pen ran out and she borrowed another one." "Bradley," said Mrs. Dorothy in a firm voice, "I kept the birthday card she gave me. It's right here in my folder, with the date and everything. It was used as the model for the forgery." She showed a pink card with a heartfelt message written by Rebecca herself. The signature was identical to the one on the original document Mrs. Dorothy had brought. Attorney Gerald tried to recover. "Even if there are irregularities in the signature, that does not change the fact that Mrs. Rebecca did not contribute financially to the couple's assets." Mrs. Dorothy smiled coldly. "Ah, about that I also have some interesting revelations." She pulled from her folder a series of bank statements and photographs. "Bradley, do you remember the savings account you opened in my name 5 years ago?" Bradley's face turned red. That was just to take advantage of the income tax exemption for seniors, Mother." "Was it really?" Mrs. Dorothy showed the statements. "Then why were you depositing money into this account and then transferring it to an account abroad?" The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Attorney Gerald tried to look at the papers, but Mrs. Dorothy kept them away from him. "And why did you use the card from this account to pay for expensive gifts for a woman named Jennifer Parker?" Rebecca felt as if she had been slapped in the face. Jennifer Parker. Who was this woman? Bradley began to stammer. "Mother, I can explain." "Can you also explain why this Jennifer received a brand new car paid for with money from this account?" continued Mrs. Dorothy, showing photographs. "A car that cost over $80,000. The photographs showed a young, beautiful woman next to a red convertible. She was smiling and hugging someone who had been cropped out of the photo, but Rebecca could see part of the yellow suit Bradley was wearing. "Or would you like to explain the 2-bedroom apartment in Beverly Hills that you bought for her?" Mrs. Dorothy showed more documents. "Also paid for with money from this joint account." Bradley looked like a fish out of water, opening and closing his mouth without being able to make a sound. Attorney Gerald tried to intervene. "Your Honor, these documents were not submitted through the proper channels." "Attorney Gerald," interrupted Mrs. Dorothy, "did you know my son was maintaining a second family?" The lawyer fell completely silent. "A second family?" asked the judge. Mrs. Dorothy showed certificates and photographs. "Jennifer Parker had a child with my son 3 years ago, a child he registered under his name and for whom he pays $5,000 a month in child support, all taken from the joint accounts he maintained with Rebecca." Rebecca felt the world collapsing around her. Bradley had a child with another woman, and he was using their money to support this second family? That's a lie, Bradley stammered. Mother, why are you doing this to me? Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell looked at him with contempt. Because I've learned that silence is also complicity, Bradley, and I will no longer be an accomplice to your crimes. She turned to Rebecca with a maternal expression. My daughter, forgive me. I've known all of this for 2 years, but I didn't have the courage to tell you. I thought it wasn't my responsibility. Rebecca couldn't stop crying, but now they were tears of relief, mixed with anger. You knew and didn't tell me. I was wrong, dear, completely wrong, but I'm here now to make it right. Mrs. Dorothy took more documents from her folder. Your Honor, I would also like to inform you that several of the properties registered in my name were transferred without my knowledge or consent. Bradley turned pale. What do you mean, Mother? Bradley forged my signature on powers of attorney and transferred 3 properties to my name. I only discovered this last week when I went to the notary to settle my retirement matters. The judge was clearly interested now. Can you prove this allegation? Yes, I can. I have expert reports here that prove the signatures on the powers of attorney are forged. I hired a private specialist to do the analysis. Attorney Gerald was sweating as much as Bradley now. This is a very serious accusation, Mrs. Dorothy. It's a true accusation, attorney, and I have more. Mrs. Dorothy opened another envelope. Here are recordings of conversations I secretly had with my son over the last 2 months. Bradley stood up abruptly. That's illegal. You can't record conversations without permission. The judge looked at him sternly. Sit down, Mr. Bradley. The law allows a person to record conversations they are a part of, especially when there is suspicion of a crime. Mrs. Dorothy connected a small recorder to the courtroom's sound system. This first recording is from 3 weeks ago when Bradley came to visit me. His voice echoed through the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. Mother, Rebecca won't get anything. I protected myself years ago. She doesn't even imagine that half the properties are in your name, and even if she found out, she doesn't have money for a decent lawyer. Bradley! Exclaimed Rebecca, shocked. The recording continued. The poor thing really believes she can face me alone. 15 years married to me, and she still hasn't learned how the world works. Without money, you're nobody. The courtroom was in total silence, everyone listening to every word attentively. And those medical reports I got, huh? I'm going to prove she's mentally unstable. Dr. Peterson helped me with that. You know how it is. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Attorney Gerald tried to stand up, but the judge motioned for him to sit down. Mrs. Dorothy's voice appeared on the recording. Bradley, don't you think you're being too unfair to Rebecca? Unfair? Mother, she lived off me for 15 years. Now she wants to take half of what I built? That's what's unfair. Let her find a job and support herself. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Bradley had his face in his hands, clearly in despair. Mrs. Dorothy wasn't finished. This next recording is from last week. Bradley was talking with Attorney Gerald in my backyard, thinking I wasn't listening. The lawyer's voice echoed through the courtroom. Bradley, are you sure we got all the necessary reports? Absolutely. Dr. Peterson made 3 different reports, all proving Rebecca has mental problems. In return, I invested money in his clinic. And about the properties in your mother's name? She'll never find out. My mother doesn't understand paperwork. She signs whatever I ask her to sign. Mrs. Dorothy's voice on the recording showed her indignation. I understand paperwork very well, Bradley, and I don't sign anything without reading it anymore. The attorney... Gerald tried to discreetly leave the courtroom, but the judge called him back. Attorney Gerald, you will remain in your place. This hearing is not over. Mrs. Dorothy continued presenting evidence. Here are the payment receipts that Bradley made to Dr. Peterson, the psychiatrist who signed the false reports. $50,000 in 3 installments. Rebecca couldn't believe what she was hearing. $50,000 for a doctor to lie about her mental state. And here, continued the mother-in-law, are the text messages between Bradley and Dr. Peterson arranging the entire farce. She showed screenshots of conversations where the two discussed details of the false reports, including which symptoms should be mentioned to appear more convincing. The judge asked to examine all the evidence closely. His expression grew increasingly serious as he analyzed the documents. "Mr. Bradley, do you have any explanation for this evidence?" Bradley looked desperately at his lawyers, but they seemed as shocked as everyone else present. I can explain everything, Your Honor. There's a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," interrupted Mrs. Dorothy, "and I'm not finished yet." She pulled a larger folder from her bag. "Here are copies of all the bank statements from my son's accounts over the last 5 years. I obtained them through the bank where I worked, using my contacts." Attorney Charles tried to protest. "This is an invasion of privacy." "It's material evidence of a crime," cut off Mrs. Dorothy. "Look here. Monthly transfers of $10,000 to the mistress's account, payments for private school for the illegitimate child, purchases of expensive jewelry, trips, all paid with money that should have been the couple's." Rebecca discovered that Bradley spent more money on his mistress in 1 month than he gave her in 6 months to run the household. "And the most serious matter," continued Mrs. Dorothy, "here are the transfers to accounts abroad. Bradley is hiding assets outside the country." The courtroom echoed with exclamations of surprise. Tax evasion was a federal crime. Bradley tried one last gambit. "Mother, you are being manipulated by Rebecca. She is using you against me." Mrs. Dorothy laughed bitterly. "Manipulated, Bradley? I discovered everything on my own. Rebecca didn't even know I existed as an ally until today." She turned to her daughter-in-law. "My dear, forgive me for waiting so long. I thought it wasn't my problem, but I realized my silence was making me complicit." Rebecca held her mother-in-law's hand with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Dorothy. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have." "You always had the courage, my dear. You just didn't have the necessary information to use it." The judge banged the gavel for silence. "This case is taking on proportions far beyond a simple divorce. I will adjourn the hearing so that the district attorney's office can be notified about possible crimes being revealed here." Attorney Gerald tried once more. "Your Honor, I ask that no hasty decisions be made based on—" "Attorney Gerald," said the judge severely, "I suggest you consult a criminal defense attorney. The evidence presented here suggests you may also have participated in criminal activities." The lawyer turned pale and ran out of the courtroom, followed by his 2 colleagues. Bradley was left alone at his table, completely defeated. "Mother, please." "I'm your son." Mrs. Dorothy looked at him with sadness. "That is exactly why I am doing this, Bradley. A son of mine should not be capable of such cruelty." She stood up and helped Rebecca gather the papers. "Come on, dear. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Rebecca looked at Bradley one last time. The man who had been her husband for 15 years seemed to have aged 10 years in one morning. "Bradley," she said calmly, "you were right about one thing. I truly didn't understand how the world worked, but I'm learning." They left the courtroom together, while Bradley remained seated alone, facing the consequences of his own actions. In the months that followed, Rebecca's life changed completely. With Mrs. Dorothy's help, she managed to gather competent attorneys who worked on the case without charging upfront fees, trusting the asset division for their payment. The investigations revealed that Bradley had hidden far more assets than they had imagined. Beyond the real estate and bank accounts, he owned shares in companies, stock market investments, and even a small farm in the countryside. Dr. Peterson, the corrupt psychiatrist, lost his professional license and was prosecuted for falsifying documents. Attorney Gerald and the other lawyers also faced proceedings before the State Bar Council. Mrs. Dorothy decided to sell all the properties that were irregularly in her name and split the money equally between Rebecca and herself. "It's the least I can do to make up for years of silence," she said. The investigation into the overseas accounts revealed that Bradley had evaded taxes for over a decade, resulting in enormous fines that consumed most of the hidden assets. Rebecca discovered she was entitled not only to half of the assets acquired during the marriage, but also to compensation for emotional damages resulting from the betrayal and fraudulent schemes. Jennifer Parker, the mistress, was subpoenaed to return gifts and money she had received improperly, as the money legally belonged to the couple. She claimed she didn't know Bradley was married, but the evidence showed she knew the situation very well. The apartment in Beverly Hills was sold, and the money reverted to Rebecca. The convertible car was seized and also sold. Even the expensive jewelry Bradley had given to the mistress had to be returned. With her new financial situation stabilized, Rebecca decided to fulfill an old dream, to open a women's clothing store aimed at mature women. Mrs. Dorothy became her partner, contributing not only money, but especially her experience and wisdom. The store was named Fresh Start and quickly became a success in the neighborhood. Women who had gone through situations similar to Rebecca's identified with the story and became loyal customers. Mrs. Dorothy also convinced Rebecca to take the college entrance exam and study law. "It's never too late to learn to defend yourself," she always said. At 42, Rebecca entered college as the oldest student in her class, but also one of the most dedicated. Bradley tried to appeal the court decision several times, but never managed to overturn the outcome. The evidence against him was simply irrefutable. He lost his business license and had to sell his company's shares to pay fines and compensation. The mistress left him as soon as the money ran out, taking their son to another state. Bradley was left alone, living in a rented apartment and working as an employee at a company that was once his competitor. Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy developed a very close relationship, almost like a real mother and daughter. The mother-in-law confessed that she had always admired Rebecca's strength, but didn't know how to show support without conflicting with her son. "I thought being loyal to Bradley meant accepting everything he did," she explained one afternoon at the store. "It took me 73 years to understand that true loyalty sometimes means saying no." The Fresh Start store expanded, and they opened a second branch 2 years later. Rebecca had become a successful small business owner, something she never imagined possible. During her law studies, she specialized in family law and began offering free consultations to women in complicated divorce situations. Her own experience made her a valuable counselor. Mrs. Dorothy, despite her age, proved to be a natural businesswoman. She handled the financial side of the stores with the precision of someone who had worked decades at the bank. Her spreadsheets and records were more organized than those of many large companies. Bradley tried to approach his mother a few times, sending letters and calling, but Mrs. Dorothy was firm. She would only speak to him when he fully admitted his mistakes and offered a sincere apology, not just to her, but especially to Rebecca. "I created a monster," she confided to Rebecca on a rainy afternoon. "After his father passed, I spoiled him too much, let him think he could do anything. But it's never too late to teach responsibility." Rebecca graduated from law school at 47, around the same time the stores completed 5 years of operation. The graduation was emotional, with Mrs. Dorothy in the front row, applauding and crying with pride. During the graduation party, Rebecca gave a speech that moved everyone present. "5 years ago, I was sitting alone in a courtroom, without a lawyer, without money, without hope. Today I am here, a law school graduate, a successful businesswoman, and most importantly, with my dignity restored. This was only possible because a courageous woman decided it's never too late to do what's right." Everyone present stood up to applaud, knowing she was referring to Mrs. Dorothy. The story of the two spread through the city, and they were invited to give talks on women's empowerment and fresh starts in later life. Mrs. Dorothy, despite being 78, lectured with the energy of a young woman. "Age is just a number," she always said. "Courage has no age, character has no age, doing what's right has no age." Rebecca opened her own law firm, specializing in family law. Her first case was defending an 80-year-old woman who was being deceived by her own children. Her experience with Bradley had taught her to recognize patterns of family manipulation. The firm grew quickly, mainly because Rebecca did not charge fees to women without financial means. She knew what it was like to be without money and without options. Mrs. Dorothy remained active in the stores until she was 80, when she decided to retire for good, but she continued going every day, just to take a little look, as she said. Bradley eventually got a better job and tried to rebuild his life. He sent a letter to Rebecca asking for sincere forgiveness, acknowledging all the mistakes and cruelties he had committed. Rebecca read the letter to Mrs. Dorothy before deciding what to do. "What do you think I should reply?" Her mother-in-law thought for a few minutes. Forgiveness is important for the one who forgives, not for the one who is forgiven. If you can forgive, forgive. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or trusting again. Rebecca replied to the letter with grace, saying she forgave him as a person, but that they would never have any kind of relationship again. It was a definitive closure, but without bitterness. Years later, when Rebecca was already a respected attorney in the city, she ran into Bradley by chance at a diner. He looked different, thinner, with graying hair, appearing older than he really was. They talked briefly, cordially, but distantly. Bradley said he was trying to be a better person and that he admired what she had managed to build. "You were always stronger than I imagined," he admitted. "Maybe if I had realized that sooner, our story would have been different." Rebecca replied wisely, "Our story was exactly as it should have been, Bradley. She taught me who I truly am inside." They said their polite goodbyes, each going their separate way. It was the closure they both needed. Mrs. Dorothy passed away at 85, peacefully, in her sleep, after a normal day at the store. Rebecca was by her side when she passed, holding her hand like a true daughter. At the wake, hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Customers from the stores, women they had helped, lawyers, judges, even the district attorney who had prosecuted the case against Bradley. Bradley also appeared at the wake discreetly at the back of the chapel. He did not try to speak to Rebecca. He simply paid his respects to his mother and left in silence. Rebecca discovered that Mrs. Dorothy had left everything to her in her will. The house, the investments, her share in the stores, everything. Along with the assets, there was a letter. "My dearest daughter of my heart, you taught me it's never too late to do what is right. Now use all of this to continue helping other women like you. Money is just a tool. What matters is what we do with it. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a better person in my final years. With all my love, Dorothy." Rebecca cried, reading the letter, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. Mrs. Dorothy had passed in peace, knowing she had corrected her mistakes. With the inheritance, Rebecca expanded her social work even further. She created a foundation offering free legal assistance to women in vulnerable situations, especially in cases of divorce and financial abuse. The foundation was named the Dorothy Mitchell Institute and became a national reference in defending women's rights. Rebecca traveled the country giving lectures and training other lawyers. At 55, Rebecca had become one of the most respected attorneys in the state, a specialist in complex family law cases. Her personal story made her even more credible and inspiring. She never married again, but had a few relationships over the years. She preferred her independence and the freedom to dedicate time to the work she loved. One day, a young journalist approached her to do a story on her journey. During the interview, the journalist asked, "Attorney Rebecca, if you could go back in time, would you change anything in your story?" Rebecca thought for a few moments before answering, "I wouldn't change a thing. Every suffering, every humiliation, every tear I shed brought me here. If I hadn't gone through all of that, I wouldn't know how to help other women going through the same." The story was published in a national magazine and inspired thousands of women across the country. Rebecca received hundreds of letters from women sharing their own stories of overcoming. One of the letters that moved her most was from a 60-year-old woman who had read the article. "Attorney Rebecca, my husband has been humiliating me for 30 years, but I never had the courage to leave. After reading your story, I realized I can also start over. It's never too late, as Mrs. Dorothy used to say. Thank you for giving me hope." Rebecca kept that letter in a special folder, along with many others like it. They reminded her why going through so many difficulties had been worth it. The foundation grew so much, it needed to open branches in other states. Rebecca hired other lawyers, psychologists, and social workers, creating a complete support network for women in vulnerable situations. Bradley, who had followed his ex-wife's success from afar, sent one final letter a few years later. "Rebecca, I know I don't even deserve for you to read this letter, but I need to say that I am proud of what you have become. You were always a better person than me, even when I tried to convince everyone otherwise. I'm sorry for delaying your journey, but I'm glad you found your path. Bradley." Rebecca read the letter and kept it with the others, not as a memento of the past, but as proof that people can change when they own up to their mistakes. At 60, Rebecca was at the peak of her career. She was invited to give lectures at universities, participated in television programs discussing women's rights, and had written 2 books about her experience. Her first book, It's Never Too Late to Start Over, became a bestseller and was adapted into a television miniseries. The actress who played Mrs. Dorothy won several awards for her performance. During the book launch, Rebecca gave an emotional speech. "This book isn't about me. It's about all the women who have the courage to start over when it seems impossible. It's about mothers-in-law who choose justice over comfort. It's about never giving up on doing what's right, even when it costs dearly." The audience stood up to applaud, and many people were crying. Among them were several women who had been helped by the foundation over the years. One of the women present was Sarah Beth, whom Rebecca had defended 5 years earlier in a case similar to her own. Sarah Beth was now a lawyer too, inspired by Rebecca's example. "Attorney," said Sarah Beth at the cocktail party after the launch, "you completely changed my life. Today I help other women the way you helped me." Rebecca hugged the young lawyer with maternal affection. "You changed your own life, my dear. I just showed you it was possible." Rebecca's second book, The Courage of Mature Women, was dedicated entirely to the memory of Mrs. Dorothy. The book told real stories of women who had found the courage to change their lives after 50. One of the stories that moved readers the most was about a 70-year-old woman who had opened a bakery after getting divorced, becoming a successful entrepreneur in her later years. Rebecca continued working until she was 70, when she finally decided to partially retire. She passed the foundation's leadership to Sarah Beth, but remained as an advisor and occasional speaker. At her retirement party, hundreds of people attended to honor her. Judges, lawyers, clients, store employees, all the people whose lives she had touched over the years. The prosecutor who had handled the case against Bradley, now retired as well, gave an emotional speech. Attorney Rebecca transformed a personal injustice into social justice. She could have used her victory only for herself, but she chose to share it with all the women who needed help. That is greatness of character. In her retirement, Rebecca decided to travel the world, something she had never done. She visited countries where she met other women fighting for the same rights, sharing experiences and learning new perspectives. In every country she visited, she gave at least one lecture on women's empowerment and women's rights. Her stories inspired women from completely different cultures. During a trip to India, she met an 80-year-old woman who had started a school for girls in a rural village. The two became friends immediately, recognizing in each other the same fighting spirit. "Age doesn't matter when you have a purpose," said the Indian woman. Rebecca completely agreed, remembering Mrs. Dorothy's words. At 75, Rebecca was happy and fulfilled. She lived in a simple but comfortable home, surrounded by books, photographs, and mementos of all the women she had helped over the years. She corresponded with dozens of them, following their journeys and celebrating their victories. Every letter she received was confirmation that her fight had been worth it. One day, she received an unexpected visit from a 25-year-old young woman who introduced herself as Bradley's granddaughter. "Attorney Rebecca," the young woman said nervously. "I am the daughter of the son my grandfather had with that other woman. I came here because I wanted to meet you in person." Rebecca was surprised, but received the young woman kindly. "My name is Dorothy," the young woman continued. "My mother gave me this name in honor of the great-grandmother I never knew, but about whom I've always heard beautiful stories." Rebecca smiled, moved. Bradley had chosen his daughter's name to honor his own mother. "My grandfather told me your story," said Dorothy. "He said you are an example of a strong and courageous woman and that he was very wrong in how he treated you." They talked for hours. The young Dorothy was a law student and dreamed of working with women's rights, inspired by the stories her grandfather told about Rebecca and her great-grandmother. "May I consider you my grandmother in my heart?" asked the young woman before leaving. Rebecca hugged her affectionately. "Of course you may, my dear, and know that Mrs. Dorothy would be very proud to know she has such a special great-granddaughter." From that day on, Dorothy began to visit Rebecca regularly. The young woman became like a real granddaughter, bringing joy and energy to the older woman's life. When Dorothy graduated from law school, Rebecca was in the front row at the graduation, applauding with pride. The young woman chose to specialize in women's law and went to work at the foundation Rebecca had created. Bradley, now 80 years old and suffering from health problems, asked to meet Rebecca one last time. She agreed, moved by curiosity and the intercession of her granddaughter Dorothy. They met at Rebecca's house on a sunny afternoon. Bradley looked different, weakened by age and illness, but his eyes showed a peace he had never demonstrated before. "Rebecca," he said in a weak voice, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say that I fully recognize all my mistakes. You became the incredible woman you always were inside, in spite of me, not because of me." Rebecca offered tea and cookies, treating him with the kindness that had always characterized her personality. "Bradley, I forgave you a long time ago, not for you, but for myself. Holding a grudge only hurt me." They talked about their granddaughter Dorothy, about Bradley's grandchildren, about the life each had built after the divorce. It was a mature conversation, without resentment, just two elderly people making peace with the past. "Did you know that our Dorothy wants to work with women's rights because of you?" asked Bradley. Rebecca smiled. "She is a special young woman, Mrs. Dorothy would be proud." Bradley agreed, and they sat in silence for a few minutes, remembering the courageous woman who had changed both their destinies. "My mother was always wiser than me," admitted Bradley. "It took me 80 years to understand the lessons she tried to teach me." When he left, Rebecca knew she probably would not see him again, but she was at peace with that. They had said goodbye as two mature people who had learned from their mistakes. Bradley passed away 2 years later, surrounded by the family he had formed late in life. Dorothy told Rebecca that in the last years of his life, her grandfather always spoke about the importance of treating women with respect and dignity. He said the greatest lesson of his life had been learning that too late, Dorothy recounted. Rebecca, at 78 years old, decided to write her complete memoirs. The book would be called 3 Women, 1 Lesson, and would tell the whole story of her Mrs. Dorothy and the young Dorothy. The book would be her final legacy, a message for future generations about courage, dignity, and the importance of never giving up on justice. As she wrote, Rebecca reflected on her extraordinary journey. From a humiliated woman with no prospects, she had become a respected attorney, successful businesswoman, and inspiration for thousands of other women. But most important of all was the inner peace she had found. She slept peacefully every night, knowing she had used her second chance in life to make a difference in the world. The young Dorothy, now 30 years old and already an experienced attorney, was helping Rebecca with the book. They spent entire afternoons talking about the stories and organizing the memories. "Grandma Rebecca," Dorothy said one afternoon, she had spontaneously started calling her that, "do you think Mrs. Dorothy knew that her action in that courtroom would change so many lives?" Rebecca thought for a few moments. "I think she knew she was doing what was right in that moment. The rest was a natural consequence of a courageous act." She looked out the window, seeing the garden she had planted with her own hands. "Your great-grandmother taught me that it's never too late to do what is right, and you are teaching me that these lessons pass from generation to generation." Dorothy smiled and continued typing Rebecca's memories, knowing she was preserving not just a personal story, but an example of courage that would inspire women for many generations. The book, 3 Women, 1 Lesson, was published when Rebecca turned 80. The launch was a national event, broadcast on television and followed by thousands of people. At the ceremony, Rebecca gave her last major public speech. "When I was sitting in that courtroom, alone and humiliated, I never imagined that would be the first day of the best part of my life. I learned that no matter how old you are, or how many mistakes you've made, it's always possible to start over with dignity." She looked at Dorothy, who was in the front row smiling proudly. "And I learned that true families aren't just by blood, but by choice and by love. Mrs. Dorothy chose me as a daughter when I needed a mother. I chose Dorothy as a granddaughter when I needed hope for the future." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Among those present were hundreds of women who had been helped by Rebecca over the years, each with her own story of fresh start and overcoming. After the book launch, Rebecca decided it was time to rest for good. She passed all her businesses and responsibilities to Dorothy and other trusted people. At 81, Rebecca lived quietly in her home, receiving visitors, reading, tending the garden, and corresponding with friends from all over the world. She passed away peacefully at 85, the same age as Mrs. Dorothy. On a sunny spring morning, Dorothy was by her side, holding her hand, just as she had done with her mother-in-law decades before. Rebecca's wake was an event that mobilized the entire city. Thousands of people attended to say goodbye to the woman who had dedicated her life to helping other women. The state governor declared official mourning, and several streets and squares were renamed in her honor. But the most moving tribute was organized by the very women she had helped. They created a permanent fund to maintain the foundation and ensured that Rebecca's work would continue indefinitely. Each contributed what they could, from large sums to small monthly donations. Dorothy officially assumed the presidency of the foundation and promised to continue Rebecca's legacy. In her first speech as president, she said, "Grandma Rebecca always said that our mission was not only to help women in difficulty, but to teach other women to help too. That way, a single courageous act would multiply infinitely." The foundation grew even more under Dorothy's leadership, who implemented new programs and expanded services to other countries in North America. The Dorothy Mitchell Institute became a global reference in defending women's rights, cited in universities and international organizations as an example of how to transform personal experiences into social change. 10 years after Rebecca's departure, Dorothy organized an international symposium in her honor. Women from dozens of countries attended to share stories of how Rebecca's work had inspired changes in their own communities. During the symposium, one of the speakers, an African lawyer, said something that moved the entire audience. Rebecca Mitchell proved that a single woman, with enough courage to not accept injustice, can change the entire world. Her story teaches us that it doesn't matter where we start, but where we choose to go. At the end of the event, Dorothy unveiled a statue honoring Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy in the city's main square. The statue showed the two women holding hands, looking toward the future with determination. The plaque at the base of the statue bore a phrase Rebecca always repeated: "It's never too late to do what is right, and it's never too early to begin." Dorothy, now 40 years old and a mother of 2 daughters, regularly told the story of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy to children. She wanted to ensure the next generation grew up knowing that women can and should fight for justice. Her daughters, Emily and Dorothy, named after her great-great-grandmother, grew up hearing these stories and developed a strong sense of social justice from an early age. The eldest, Emily, at 15, already spoke of studying law to continue the family's work. The youngest, Dorothy, at 12, said she wanted to be a journalist to tell stories of courageous women. The foundation continued to grow and adapt to new times. They created mobile apps that offered basic legal guidance, online support groups, and even entrepreneurship courses for women who wanted to start their lives over. Each new generation of the foundation's staff and volunteers received training about the history of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy. It was important that everyone understood that the work they did was born from an injustice transformed into purpose. Dorothy kept a photograph of the 3 Dorothys in her office: the courageous great-grandmother, Rebecca, who had become a Dorothy at heart, and herself. The photo daily reminded her that she was part of a lineage of strong, determined women. Periodically, she received letters from women who had read Rebecca's books and found the courage to change their own lives. Each letter confirmed that the legacy remained alive and multiplying. One of the most touching letters she received was from a 70-year-old Japanese woman who had divorced after reading "It's Never Too Late to Start Over." The woman wrote in Portuguese with the help of a translator: "Mrs. Dorothy, your grandmother gave me courage I didn't know I had. Now at 70, I've opened my own ikebana shop and I am happy for the first time in decades. Arigatou gozaimasu." Dorothy kept all these letters in a special archive, knowing that each one represented a life transformed by the courage of 2 women who had refused to accept injustice. When she completed 25 years as president of the foundation, Dorothy organized a special celebration. She invited all the women who had been assisted over those years to share their stories of overcoming. The event lasted 3 days and was streamed online to the entire world. Hundreds of women took the stage to tell how their lives had changed after receiving help from the foundation. One of the most moving stories was told by a 90-year-old woman who had divorced at 85, inspired by Rebecca's example. "I thought it was too late for me, but I remembered that Mrs. Dorothy had the courage at 73. If she could, I could too." At the end of the event, Dorothy gave a speech that perfectly summarized Rebecca's legacy. 25 years ago, one woman decided she would no longer accept being humiliated. Today, thousands of women around the world have the courage to make the same choice. That is the power of multiplying good. The audience rose in a standing ovation, and many people were crying with emotion. Among them were Dorothy's daughters, now young adults following their own paths in the fight for justice. Emily had graduated from law school and worked at the foundation, specializing in cases of financial abuse. The younger Dorothy had become an investigative journalist, exposing corruption schemes that especially harmed women. The two sisters represented the fourth generation of the family dedicated to social justice, proving that the legacy of courage truly passed from mother to daughter. In their interviews, the two always cited the story of their great-grandmother Rebecca and their great-great-grandmother Dorothy as inspiration for their work. They knew they were part of something bigger than themselves. During a joint interview for an international magazine, Emily said, "Our family is united not just by blood, but by a common purpose. We learned from a young age that we have the responsibility to use our privileges to help those in need." Dorothy, the journalist, added, "Our family's history teaches us that an injustice can be the beginning of social transformation, if we have the courage not to accept the unacceptable." The reporter asked if they felt pressured by the responsibility of continuing such an important legacy. "It's not pressure," they answered almost in unison. "It's a privilege." 50 years after that historic day in court, the story of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy continued to inspire women all over the world. Their books had been translated into dozens of languages and were studied at universities as an example of social transformation. The foundation that began as a dream to help a few women had become an international organization with offices in 15 countries and thousands of employees and volunteers. But most importantly, in every office, in every consultation, in every lecture, the original spirit remained alive. It's never too late to do what is right, and a single courageous act can change everything. Dorothy, now a 65-year-old woman, still chaired the foundation with the same energy as when she was young. She had dedicated her entire life to honoring the memory of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy, and took pride in every woman they were able to help. In her office, she kept a photo from the day Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy emerged victorious from that courtroom. It was a black-and-white photo, slightly blurred, but it perfectly captured the dignity and determination of the two women. Below the photo, a plaque with the inscription, "Justice sometimes takes time, but it always arrives for those who have the courage to seek it." This phrase had become the unofficial motto of the foundation, repeated in ceremonies, lectures, and official documents. It was a constant reminder that the fight for justice requires patience, persistence, and above all, courage. When young attorneys arrived to work at the foundation, Dorothy always took them to see the memorial for Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy that had been created in the main building. There, original documents from the case, photographs, letters, and personal belongings of the two women were on display. "This is our daily inspiration," Dorothy would say to each new employee. Two women who refused to accept injustice and changed the world forever. The memorial also included an interactive section where visitors could learn stories of other women who had been helped by the foundation over the years. It was a way of showing that the legacy of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy continued to live and multiply. Students of various ages visited the memorial regularly, and many left there determined to pursue careers focused on social justice. Dorothy was always moved to see the educational impact of the space. During one of these visits, a 10-year-old girl asked, "Aunt Dorothy, why did Mrs. Dorothy take so long to help Rebecca?" The child's simple question made Dorothy reflect on one of the most important lessons of the story. "Because sometimes we need time to find courage, my dear. The important thing is that when she found it, she didn't waste it. Dorothy's answer became part of the memorial's educational materials, helping visitors understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. Years later, when Dorothy finally decided to retire at 70, she organized a special ceremony to pass the presidency of the foundation to Emily, her eldest daughter. During the ceremony, Dorothy gave an emotional speech. "When I was little and my mother told me the story of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy, I thought it was just a beautiful story. Today I know it was a manual on how to live with dignity and purpose." She looked at Emily, who was visibly moved. "Emily, you are not just receiving a position. You are receiving the responsibility of keeping alive a legacy that has transformed millions of lives. Use it with wisdom and courage." Emily, now 45 and an experienced lawyer, accepted the responsibility seriously. "Grandma Rebecca always said we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our descendants. I promise to care for this legacy, to deliver it even stronger to the next generation." The ceremony was broadcast worldwide, and thousands of women watched emotionally as the baton was passed between two generations of fighters. During her retirement, Dorothy wrote her own memoirs, recounting what it was like to grow up being the granddaughter of Rebecca's heart and the true great-granddaughter of Mrs. Dorothy. The book, titled Granddaughter of Two Warriors, became another family bestseller. In the book, Dorothy revealed intimate details of her life with Rebecca, showing that behind the strong and determined woman, there was also a sensitive, caring person full of doubts, like any human being. "Grandma Rebecca wasn't a superhero," wrote Dorothy. "She was an ordinary woman who found extraordinary courage when she needed to. That makes her even more admirable, because it proves that any one of us can do the same." The book also told funny and touching stories of family life, showing that the fight for social justice did not prevent moments of joy, love, and simplicity. One of the stories that most moved readers was about how Rebecca taught Dorothy to cook when she was a teenager. She said an independent woman needed to know how to do at least 3 things: cook, manage money, and not accept disrespect, and that the order didn't matter, as long as she learned all 3. Emily continued her mother's work with the same dedication, but also brought new ideas and methods. She implemented technology programs to reach women in remote areas and created partnerships with companies to offer job opportunities. Under her leadership, the foundation modernized without losing its essence. They created apps that offered basic legal advice, online entrepreneurship courses, and virtual support groups for geographically isolated women. The sister Dorothy, the journalist, continued her investigative work and became one of the most respected professionals in the country. Her documentaries on women's rights won international awards and helped bring visibility to previously ignored social problems. The two sisters worked in perfect harmony, each contributing their specific skills to keep the family legacy alive. During a joint interview to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Rebecca's historic victory in court, the two reflected on the lasting impact of that moment. Emily. 60 years later, we still find women who cite our grandmother as inspiration. This shows that some acts of courage echo through eternity. Dorothy. What impresses me most is that the story remains relevant. Unfortunately, there are still many women going through what our grandmother went through. The interviewer asked what the main lesson they had learned from the family history was. "That justice is not something that simply happens," replied Emily. "It's something we build every day with small acts of courage." Dorothy added, "And that a true family is formed by people who choose to fight for the same values, not just by those who share the same blood." The interview was seen by millions of people and inspired a new generation of young people to become interested in social justice and women's rights. That year, commemorating the 60th anniversary of the court victory, the city where it all happened declared March 15th as Municipal Women's Courage Day, in honor of the date of the historic hearing. The annual celebration became a tradition, with lectures, exhibitions, and award ceremonies for women who stand out in the fight for social justice. During the first official celebration, the city's mayor gave an emotional speech. "Rebecca Mitchell and Dorothy Mitchell taught us that our city can be the birthplace of great social transformations. They proved that we don't need to wait for changes to come from outside. We can be the agents of transformation ourselves. In the audience, Emily and Dorothy smiled proudly, knowing that the legacy of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy had become the historical and cultural heritage of the entire community. The annual event attracted visitors from other states and countries, turning the city into a point of reference for social awareness tourism. Hotels, restaurants, and tour guides specialized in telling the story of the two courageous women. One of the most popular attractions was the tour that included visits to the courthouse where it all began, the first Fresh Start store, the Foundation Memorial, and the houses where Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy lived. The official tour guide always ended the tour with the same words: "This is not just a story about two women. It's a story about all of us, about our ability to turn pain into purpose and injustice into social change." Many tourists left the tour moved, and some even decided to change careers to dedicate themselves to social causes after learning the story. An international travel agency created a special package called Courage Trail, which included visits to various locations in the United States where women had led important social changes, always starting with the city of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy. Each year, Women's Courage Day grew larger and more important. Politicians, artists, intellectuals, and activists from across the country attended to participate in the celebrations and speak about women's rights. During one of these celebrations, one of the speakers, a renowned sociologist, said something that perfectly summarized the impact of the story. Rebecca and Dorothy proved to us that revolution does not need to be violent or destroy institutions. Sometimes, revolution is simply a mother-in-law deciding to support her daughter-in-law instead of her son when the son is wrong. The phrase went viral on social media and was reproduced in thousands of posts, memes, and articles about feminism and social justice. Emily and Dorothy, now experienced grandmothers, continued working together to keep the legacy alive. Their daughters and granddaughters grew up hearing the stories and preparing to carry on the work when the time came. One afternoon, while organizing old documents in the Foundation's archive, Emily found a letter that Rebecca had written but never sent. The letter was addressed to the future generations of our chosen family. If you are reading this, it means our work continued beyond me as I always dreamed. Always remember, you have not just inherited an organization, but a responsibility. Use it to help other women discover their own strength. The two sisters cried reading the letter, moved by Rebecca's wisdom and foresight. "She truly knew this would become bigger than she imagined," said Dorothy, wiping away tears. "And she knew we would need guidance to continue the work," added Emily. The letter was framed and placed in the Foundation's meeting room, where it would serve as daily inspiration for all the employees and volunteers. 70 years after that historic day in court, the story of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy had become a living legend, studied in universities, cited in political speeches, and a reference for human rights organizations worldwide. The Foundation had helped more than 1 million women directly, and indirectly had influenced changes in laws, public policies, and social attitudes in dozens of countries. But perhaps the most important impact was cultural. They had helped create a generation of women who no longer accepted being diminished or humiliated, who knew how to recognize their rights and fight for them. In a national survey on feminist awareness, 67% of respondents cited Rebecca's story as an influence on their own life decisions. The number was even higher among women over 50. One respondent, an 80-year-old woman, said, "When my husband started treating me badly, I remembered Rebecca and thought, if she managed to start over at 40, I can at 75. Another respondent, 65 years old, stated, "Mrs. Dorothy's story taught me that it's never too late to do what's right. I used that to reconcile with my daughter after 15 years of fighting." These testimonials showed that the legacy had transcended legal issues and become a life philosophy for thousands of people. Emily, now 70 years old and still active as the Foundation's president, frequently received invitations for international lectures on women's leadership and social change. In one such lecture, for an audience of young African leaders, she summarized the essence of the family legacy. "My grandmother Rebecca taught me that an individual problem can become a collective solution if we have enough courage and generosity to transform our pain into a bridge to help other people." The audience rose in a standing ovation, and many women approached her after the lecture to tell their own stories of overcoming, inspired by Rebecca's example. A young lawyer from Kenya said, "Attorney Emily, your family's story reached our village through a borrowed book. It inspired my mother to leave a violent husband and inspired me to study law to help other women." Stories like this confirmed that the impact of the legacy had crossed all geographical, cultural, and linguistic boundaries. Dorothy, the journalist, continued documenting stories of courageous women around the world, always connecting them to the pioneering example of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy. Her most recent documentary, Daughters of Courage, showed how the story of the two American women had inspired feminist movements on different continents. The film won the award for Best Documentary at the International Human Rights Film Festival and was distributed free of charge to schools and universities worldwide. One of the documentary's most impactful scenes showed a protest in India, where thousands of women carried signs with a photo of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy, translating the phrase into Hindi, "It's never too late to do what is right." These images proved that the two American women had become universal symbols of courage and female justice. During the documentary's award ceremony, Dorothy gave an emotional speech. "My grandmother Rebecca always said that a well-told story can change the world. Today we see she was right. Her story and Mrs. Dorothy's crossed oceans and are changing lives in places they never even dreamed of visiting." The documentary was subtitled in more than 20 languages and became required material in women's studies courses at various international universities. Professors from different countries reported that their students were deeply impacted by the story, especially by the figure of Mrs. Dorothy, who represented the possibility of change in later life. A professor from Harvard University wrote to Dorothy, "Dr. Dorothy, your historical documents have become an essential part of our curriculum. Your students always cite Mrs. Dorothy as an example that wisdom and courage have no age." With each passing year, it became clearer that Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy had planted a seed that continued to sprout in places and ways they could never have imagined. 80 years after that historic day in court, a new generation was taking over the leadership of the foundation. Great-granddaughters and great-great-granddaughters of Dorothy, the journalist, were reaching adulthood already completely immersed in the culture of social justice created by the family. The newest leader, Amanda Grace, great-granddaughter of Dorothy and great-great-granddaughter in spirit of Rebecca, assumed the presidency of the foundation at 35, bringing knowledge in technology and social media that allowed the work's reach to expand even further. Under her leadership, the foundation created a global digital platform that connects women in vulnerable situations with volunteer lawyers, psychologists, social workers, and other women who have already been through similar situations. The platform, called the Dorothy Network, in honor of the 3 Dorothys in the family, was available in 50 languages and served women in over 100 countries. Amanda Grace also implemented an online mentorship program where women who have already overcome similar difficulties guide others who are beginning their journey of starting over. Grandma Rebecca always said that one woman helping another can change the world, explained Amanda Grace during the program's launch. Technology allows us to multiply that help exponentially. The program was an immediate success, with over 100,000 volunteer mentors registering in the first month and tens of thousands of women seeking guidance. One of the program's most moving stories was that of a Syrian refugee woman in Germany, who was mentored by a Brazilian woman who had gone through a similar situation of starting over in a foreign country. Technology allows us to break barriers that Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy couldn't even imagine existed, said Amanda Grace during an international conference on social innovation. But she always made a point of emphasizing that technology was merely a tool. The essence of the work remained the same: women helping women with courage and solidarity. During an interview for a social technology magazine, Amanda Grace was asked how she kept the original spirit of the foundation alive amid so much modernization. "Every Monday our team gathers and reads a real story of a woman who was helped by us. It reminds us that behind every click, every message, every algorithm, there is a real person who needs hope and support. The tradition had been created by Rebecca herself decades earlier and continued to be followed religiously by all generations of the Foundation's leadership. Amanda Grace kept on her desk a photo from the Foundation's inaugural meeting, where Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy appeared smiling alongside the first employees. The photo served as a daily reminder that all innovation should serve the original purpose, to give dignity and hope to women in difficulty. The Foundation had grown so large and influential that international organizations like the UN began consulting them on public policies for women's rights. Amanda Grace was invited to be a special consultant for UN Women, a position she accepted on the condition that she could split her time with the Foundation's presidency. Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy started by helping one woman at a time, she said during her swearing in at the UN. Now we have the opportunity to help millions of women through appropriate public policies. In her first report to the UN, Amanda Grace proposed the creation of an international protocol based on the methodology developed by the Foundation over 80 years. The protocol, called the Dorothy-Rebecca Guidelines, established minimum standards for assisting women in situations of social vulnerability, with a special focus on financial abuse and psychological manipulation. 15 countries adopted the protocol in the first year, and another 20 expressed interest in implementing it gradually. One of the protocol's most important innovations was the concept of intergenerational female solidarity, based on the example of Mrs. Dorothy supporting Rebecca, despite the age difference and complicated family relationship. The concept proposed specific programs to connect older women with younger ones, leveraging the experience of the former to guide the latter, and the energy of the younger ones to revitalize the older ones. Several countries reported extraordinary results with these programs, confirming that Mrs. Dorothy's original intuition about the strength of female solidarity was correct. During a special session of the UN General Assembly dedicated to women's rights, Amanda Grace presented data proving the global impact of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy's legacy. Over 15 million women had been directly helped by the Foundation and partner organizations over 80 years. Indirectly, through changes in laws and public policies influenced by their work, hundreds of millions of women had benefited. 2 women from the United States proved that an individual injustice, when transformed into a collective struggle, can change the destiny of future generations, Amanda Grace told the Assembly. The speech was interrupted several times by applause, and at the end, representatives from 193 countries rose in a standing ovation. That day, the UN approved a resolution declaring March 15th as International Women's Courage Day, officially establishing worldwide the date that the small American town had chosen decades before. The resolution stated that all member countries should organize educational activities about women's rights on this date, using the story of Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy as an inspiring example. Amanda Grace cried emotionally during the voting, thinking about how her ancestors would be proud to see her personal struggle become official inspiration for the entire world. After the UN session, she immediately called Emily and Dorothy, now 85 years old, to share the news. "Grandmas," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy have just become a heritage of humanity." The 2 ladies cried on the phone, remembering all the stories they had heard during childhood about the courage of their ancestors. "They deserved this recognition a long time ago," said Emily. "And most importantly, millions of women will benefit because their story will be told officially all over the world," added Dorothy. That night, Amanda Grace wrote in her personal diary, "Today, I completely understood what Grandma Rebecca meant when she spoke about the multiplication of good. A courageous act by 2 women in 1960 has today become the official policy of 193 countries. This is how you change the world, 1 woman at a time, 1 act of courage at a time." End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you follow us from. If this story of courage and fresh start touched your heart, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you believe Mrs. Dorothy made the right decision by supporting Rebecca? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories we have prepared especially for you.